Ciao a tutti e benvenuti a HOMO FABER Italia, il primo programma videocast che vuole esplorare il percorso personale e professionale di italiani che hanno avuto successo all'estero. Conduce Lidia Panarello. Welcome to a new episode of HOMO FABER Italia, the first videocast which aims to explore personal and professional paths of successful Italians who made a career abroad. Today, we're very pleased to have with us Matteo Maggiore, Director of Communication at the European Investment Bank. Before joining the EIB, Mr. Maggiore has achieved a very remarkable career across the media and communication space at the most prestigious international institutions. He started his career in Berlin, where he worked as an independent documentary producer. Then he had the opportunity to join the European Commission as a media expert, then the European Parliament as a political officer, then the BBC as a manager of European affairs, and finally the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development as a deputy director of public affairs and communication. So today with Mr. Maggiore, we will talk about his path that has brought him till Luxembourg at the European Investment Bank. Welcome again, and how are you, Mr. Maggiore, and where are you at the moment?
Hello, very, very happy to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very well, and I am in an exceptionally sunny Luxembourg.
Can you please tell us and to our audience what does a director of communication at the world's largest multinational lender do?
But one thing he doesn't do in this case, me, is get bored. If there was something that surprised me about this bank, when I joined the bank, I didn't know much about the financial sector. I never worked in it, and from the outside, it is an area of work that always held a certain forbidding nature for me. And I thought perhaps it would be slightly slow moving compared to other things I'd done in the past. Well, that is certainly not the case. Multilateral banks, public banks in general, and certainly this one, tend to be incredibly dynamic environments. They come up with many, many ideas, many initiatives, many projects, and you literally don't have time to communicate. Sometimes my job consists also of telling colleagues not to overdo it with new initiatives, because ultimately communication is about repeating. It's about sustaining a certain narrative, a certain message for a while. And sometimes people move so fast that it's not that easy to do. So we communicate, we interact with the outside world, we make sure that people know what we're about, ideally understand it in full and support it. And as I said, this implies making sure that you repeat the same message again and again.
And since you work in the communication and media space, we know that the traditional media and corporate communication has been very much disrupted by social media. So we want to know, as a director of communication, how has your communication strategies changed with this new medium in the menu for someone like you that deals on this issue?
Well, it's about social media. It's about generally digital. Digital allows people to interact. It's a technology that transfers power away from people that actually used to speak at other people, had the power to, the so-called mass media, to actually address a message at a broadly unknown and unknowable public, and did not expect a response. They just communicated one way. Digital has turned this into two-way or multi-point, if you like, communication. And that means that you have to develop a very, very profound and healthy respect for the people you talk to. You don't talk at them anymore. You have to listen. Mm-hmm. What social media is about is mostly listening in the good way, and also in slightly uncomfortable ways, because you listen in the good way when you actually try and learn about what people want. Ultimately, communication is about supply and demand. If you have stories that you think are great and you tell them to people who don't care about them, and you're offering a supply to a place that has no demand for it. So you got to listen. You got to learn about what people are interested in and try and intersect their attention with your content. But then there is a more sinister bit of so-called listening, which has to do with all the data that we can get out of people. And I don't think anybody, and I'm talking as a citizen more than a professional, understands the degree of knowledge that service providers, communicators, platforms, social media operators can acquire about them. Ultimately, people who use social media are not users, they're the product that is actually on sale. And that is, as a director of communication in a public body, you have to be very, very careful to be ethical about it and very cautious about what you decide to learn about your audience, because you could learn too much.
Very interesting. Now, Mr. Maggiore, we would like to take a step back and start from the beginning, from where everything started, and we want to go back quite some years. So going back to university, what did you dream to become as an adult? Have you always been very passionate about media and communication?
No, if somebody had told me when I was young that I would be working in communication or head of communication of a multilateral, I would have been very surprised. I was very interested in journalism and current affairs and politics from the start, but I thought I would be on that side of the industry, and I was for a considerable time. I started as a producer. I left my country, which happened not with a deliberate decision, but more by chance a little bit at a time, and I didn't quite realize I was doing it. And then and then I started in production, and then I went on to politics, and really built on the previous thing I had done through mostly the curiosity of doing something different, and that's what was driving me.
And if you were to assess your very long professional experience, which experience do you think has taught you the most, or has given you the most lesson for the role that you are currently holding?
Well, these are two different questions. The second one is easier in a way. Where did I learn most in terms of the skills that I need today? Yeah, definitely in journalism, but also in working in large organizations. I mean, large organizations are very complex ecosystems. And they have recurring patterns. They're all different, but they have things in common. And once you learn to survive in one, you are fitter to survive in different ones. But I think you learn a lot everywhere, including when you make mistakes, including when you take jobs that something in your guts tells you, I don't know if this is the right thing. But in the face of it, everything, all the boxes are ticked, and everything is fine, and it looks like it's something that is for you. And then once you're in it, you discover that it isn't. But then you learn a lot of things about listening to your gut feelings. You learn about a very important thing, which is that, well, somebody expressed it to me in this way: you don't choose jobs, you choose bosses. And there's something about the fact that the environment you're in, the people you work with, as important and possibly more important than the actual job. And if that goes wrong, then you have a really, really big problem. But it's something that as a young person you don't know, and you learn through making mistakes and learning by doing, really.
For example, can you give us some concrete lesson learned from this topic that you brought to light?
There are many, and I think they're very personal in the sense that everybody takes different findings out of the same experience. For me, for example, one thing I learned at some point was that I prefer to work in the public sector than in a commercial environment. I learned that much as, for example, working for a series of different clients doing different things can be incredibly attractive for certain people and break the monotony of doing other things, I am somebody that prefers to build brick by brick upon a certain experience rather than continuously working for many different people. I discovered I didn't want to be a journalist after being a journalist because I found that it was a job that, first of all, requires certain attitudes and certain ways of being that were not my own. And secondly, because I discovered that it's actually a very repetitive job. And it's great if there are certain things that drive you, like the adrenaline of a deadline and the curiosity about who does what and things like that. But it's not great if you're somebody that wants to build and change day in, day out. And frankly, if you're a journalist, you do very much the same thing over a number of years. But that is a lesson that I drew. But other people might say, no, it's not at all like that, and so on. But the lesson for everybody is that every experience, including the negative ones, teach you something about jobs, about environments, and about yourself.
You worked indeed across multiple organizations. What has been, on the other side, your proudest moment in one of those that you particularly keep very close to your heart?
I have been fortunate, and there's been a number of occasions where I don't know if proud is the right word, but certainly fortunate, and finding that I was at the center of something really good and really important. I worked for the BBC for 20 years. There were many moments that stand out, including the redrafting or the drafting of the first strategy for global broadcasting that the BBC has ever had. Can you imagine? BBC is such a global entity. People are used to recognizing it everywhere in the world, but it had never developed a proper coherent strategy for what it did in the world globally. And participating and leading that exercise has been an incredibly rewarding professional experience. Working in the European Parliament at the time, at the very, very hard, difficult time of 91, 92, the Yugoslav crisis and the beginning of the terrible wars in Yugoslavia, really was a gut-wrenching but incredibly important and unique moment to work in a European environment. Here at the bank, I must say that as soon as I arrived, I found myself plunged into a major European initiative to recover from the 2008 crisis, the Juncker plan that was designed to kickstart investment in Europe again. I had to learn real fast about a number of very complex banking, financial, investment-related issues, but the politics of it was something I recognized immediately, and it was really how a strong, knowledgeable institution could make a real impact and a real difference to people's lives by turning itself inside out and developing a new DNA. And that was incredibly exciting. I was very fortunate to be there at that moment.
Now let's turn more toward discussing some reflection of your career, and in order to provide some advices to our younger audience. Do you think that your remarkable career in media and communication would have happened if you had stayed in Italy?
Well, by definition, I made a career outside of Italy by being willing to move. You know, when I talk to my children or to young people that I meet, one of the pieces of advice that I keep giving is, as long as you can, and as long as you're comfortable with it, be mobile. The majority of people, for very good reasons and very, very respectable ways of being, probably saner ways of being than my own, tend to remain in the place where they're born, or at least where they grow up. And of course that is, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, but it does limit a little bit the choice that you have in terms of jobs, of opportunities. People who are willing to move and to move at the drop of a hat, frankly, and to move quickly and to adapt. And it takes a lot of work. Arriving in a new country that you don't know, it's almost funny, you know. It's the little things. The big things are easy, but the little things, you know, where do you buy this, and how do you sort that out, and how do you get a gas connection or facilities and things like that. But if you can do that, then you are much more marketable, and you have a greater choice of jobs, and you can respond to what happens around you. So by definition, no, it wouldn't have happened in Italy. I might have had a wonderful career if I'd stayed in Italy, but it would have been very, very different from the career I had. And it would have been dominated by Italian culture with all that we know. So it would have been less diverse culturally and personally, but possibly it would have been more linear. If you decide to follow the opportunities that are presented to you, you end up zigging and zagging a lot. And so you go forward, then you stay put, and then you go back, and then you try something new. It's different. I like it that way, but it's an acquired taste.
I share most of the things you just said, having lived for the past 8 years in 8 different countries, so I know what you are referring to. What advice would you give to young Italians that are keen to make a career in media and communication, other than being mobile?
You know, it's a very difficult question for me because it's an industry and a profession that I love, and it's also a profession that the way we've known it so far is dead. Okay, precisely for what we were saying at the beginning about digital. In a way, people have never consumed as much media content, communication content as they do now. And yet the economics of the sector has been completely disrupted, like very few others. And that is a problem. If you want to make a living in this field, you find that newspapers are going bust, broadcasters are going bust. And it's not because people don't want news and they don't want programs. They do desperately. There's a massive demand for it, but there's no equivalent willingness to pay. So, the economics of this whole thing, I mean, we can go on for hours, but my advice would be you have to see yourself as an entrepreneur and an inventor more than an employee. Somebody said, until a certain point, people looked for jobs and found them. Nowadays, people have to invent jobs. And I think young people will have to invent jobs much more than I ever had to. So if you can invent a way to produce content and that is, can be monetized, then you can be a millionaire. I mean, in ways in which journalists could never hope to be. I mean, what happens with YouTube, with new ways of bringing in crowdfunding for the strangest things, at least strange for people my age, is extraordinary. There, one piece of not advice, but certainly opinion, and people can do whatever they want with it. But be ethical. Because, the traditional media have gone bust. They're going away. There are new ways of making money that rely on good things and bad things. Just make sure you do the good things, not the bad things. Because the potential for both is huge. It's enormous. And the line between them is fine. So just do a lot of internal checks with your principles, with your values, and make sure that you use the potential to do things that are new, that are monetizable, but they're also good, for want of a better word.
That's definitely not an easy task to find a way to make media successfully monetized, but you at least gave us a very concrete advice. And if you were to go back when you were 20, what advice would you wish you had known, but you never received?
I think I'll go with choose a boss, not a job. Remember that working with somebody you respect is incredibly important. So for me, if I had to give advice to my 20-year-old persona, I would certainly give, this is something that I wish somebody had told me. It would have saved me some negative experiences.
And since you are head of a large department here at EAB and you are in the position of hiring new employees, what traits do you look for in a prospective candidate?
I think, well, it depends. It depends on, there are some recruitments that are very determined by the skills you need in that. So if I need a writer, I need somebody who can write. If I need a filmmaker, I need somebody who can film. And I can't decide arbitrarily or personally or discretionarily just to, that I want somebody that has certain virtues rather than others, unless they have that skill. I think that there are two things that I value three things that I value enormously: creativity, judgment, and attachment to values. Creativity allows people to think out of the box and to bring something that what you ask for when you're looking for a profile, but what you don't know is what you would like, even if you don't think of it. But if somebody arrives and says, I can do what you want me to do, but I can also do other things, and let me tell you what those things are, that has an incredible value. Judgment is crucial. especially when you work in a creative sector for a very politics-driven institution. There you have to be able to balance two worlds, and it's very, very difficult. It's probably the area where most people that fail. Okay, the people who don't do well, most often it's because they're either too political and they're not creative enough, or they're too creative and they can't deal with the political world. So to find the right balance between those two is crucial. And then ethics and attachment to values is absolutely essential, especially in a profession that necessarily entails a lot of autonomy. We cannot have a heavy hierarchy determining every piece of content that we produce, every act of communication. It would be terrible. So you need people to have a very strong internal compass, moral compass, so that you can trust them to ask the right questions, to raise the right objections, and to be alert to the key traps that can be on our path at any turn.
Mr. Maggiore, we're about to conclude this interview. I want to conclude with a lightning round. First of all, what is your favorite book that you would advise any young Italian or someone that is entering now into the job force you would recommend?
Frankly, it's a very, very difficult question, because I would go with, probably of the modern classics, either Joyce's Ulysses or Kafka's Trial or Brothers Karamazov. Ultimately, you learn from those books a huge amount about human interaction that will serve you well.
I'm taking notes. And the final question is, in spite of all the years you lived abroad, what is a stereotypical Italian habit or trait that you still keep very dear to you?
Probably, pasta.
Simple.
Pasta.
Mr. Maggiore, on behalf of HOMO FABER Italia, we would like to thank you very much for your participation, and we wish you a great continuation with the successful work you do here at the EAP. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.